My house was one of the oldest on the road. By the looks of the architecture, it was certainly pre-Victorian. But I'd always found this weird, as almost every other house on our estate was less than 30 years old. I say almost, because there was one other, virtually identical to mine in every single way, apart from the fact that it had been burned to a scorched wreck many years ago. Up until recently, children of the area had used it as a play area of sorts, but not anymore. A small boy went missing there a couple of years ago, and the place is rumoured to be both haunted and the hideout of drug dealers. I've always avoided it if I can, going the longer route to work just to avoid it. It never made sense to me why it was never demolished. But I digress. It remains there in its ugly, half-destroyed form to this day. About a week ago, I was sleeping downstairs, keeping the dog company. He gets awfully lonely, especially when I go to work. Anyway, I got up to grab a glass of water when I noticed a small flickering light in the distance through my kitchen window. It was very dark outside though, but nonetheless I knew it was coming from the abandoned house. Probably just kids messing about, I thought to myself. I was about to turn away when I heard a loud but muffled shriek emanating from outside. My head spun back and I squinted through the glass, trying to get a better look at where the sound was coming from. I would have been freaked out normally, but I always felt safer with my dog around. He began barking manically in response to the sound, and I saw my neighbour's lights turning on, one at a time. The screeching then stopped as quickly as it started, and all went still. I've only ever heard rumours of the house, but the sounds I heard simply amplified my suspicions that something dubious was going on there. My dog was still clearly upset. Phoenix was his name, by the way. I spent the next few minutes calming him down, ready to go back to sleep. I was tired. The authorities could deal with what was going on over the road. I woke early the next morning to the barks of Phoenix. He was always cranky when he was hungry in the mornings. I hastily got up, headed to the kitchen, and filled his bowl to shut him up. As I was in the kitchen, I decided to take another peek out of the window. The house looked as it always had, although from here I couldn't really get a very good look at it. It was the weekend, and I had time to kill. I plopped down onto the sofa and started watching some TV, when something strange began to assault my senses. A putrid smell began to waft towards me. This confused me, as I never let meat spoil. I went back into the kitchen and was surprised to notice that the smell disappeared. Heading back into my living room, the smell hit me just as hard as it did the first time. It was getting worse. Some rodent had probably died in the walls. I'd have to call pest control. I got washed and dressed, trying to ignore the smell. It now seemed to follow me around the house, wherever I went. I was trying really hard not to let it spoil my weekend. It was getting close to evening now, and I was starting to think about making a call regarding the smell, but it seemed to be getting better. Maybe I was going nose blind to it, but regardless, it was time to walk Phoenix. Phoenix loved walking, and to be honest, so did I. It was one of my favourite things to do. We headed out, and I had the option of left or right. Now usually I'd go right and avoid the abandoned house, but after last night's events, I turned left. I just wanted to pass the place and have a look. I passed all the spangly looking new houses. It was so strange how much they contrasted the burnt wreck I was approaching. The house was mainly made of wood, which would probably explain why it burnt down in the first place. The top floor had been virtually destroyed, and it was only really the ground floor that remained somewhat intact. My eyes scanned the property. I could see the light through the other end in most rooms, but there was one where I could not. An increased feeling of curiosity began to invade my mind. It was strange, because I always try to avoid danger. What was that saying? Curiosity killed the cat. Like an itch I couldn't scratch, my wondering grew until I had no choice. I tied Phoenix up to a fence. I didn't want to put him at risk too. He was clearly unhappy with this, but obedient enough not to make a fuss out of it. I slowly made my way past the badly placed metal fence that was doing such a bad job of keeping intruders out. It was getting dark now, so it was unlikely that anyone would see me going in. This was a neighbourhood where people like to keep themselves to themselves. There was only one real way in, and it wasn't the front door. That had been completely caved in during the fire. I had no choice but to go through the window I'd been looking at. Upon entering, a musty smell lingered about the place. I won't stay here long, I thought to myself. The remnants of furniture, scorched black from the flames, had been vandalised, almost beyond recognition. The place was covered in graffiti, and looked very much like a den of the youth. I ambled through carefully, not wanting to step on any broken glass. This was the only intact room. I felt mildly disappointed, as I was expecting to find something more. It was then I noticed something small and shiny on the floor. I think it was a coin. I took a step forward to have a look at it, but as I did this, my foot half sunk through the floor. The shock and the noise panicked me, and I let out a small yelp as this happened. Phoenix must have heard this, because I could hear him barking in the distance. I was okay. The floor hadn't completely collapsed. But what was interesting was that this building had a basement that I never knew about. I suppose it made sense. My house had a basement after all. I pulled my foot out of the floor and started to take up the dusty-looking mat that was covering where it had almost fallen through. Underneath, I saw there was a trapdoor, and with my curiosity renewed, I opened it up. I was immediately met with a highly intense, putrid smell. I briefly felt nauseated and pulled my arm over my nose. It was clear that something had died down there. I turned on the flashlight built into my phone and shone it around the void in the floor. It looked strangely clean down there, which was a bizarre contrast to the smell it produced. There was a stepladder, which allowed me to climb down. In hindsight, that seemed dumb, but the clean environment told me that nothing really ever went down here. I reached the bottom of the ladder and shone my light around. There were a couple of empty bookcases and a rocking chair in the corner. Behind me was a faded dressing cover that people used in Victorian times to get dressed behind. The other side of the room was an ornate-looking metal door. Feeling immediately drawn to it, I walked over and was shocked when the door opened with ease. On the other side was some strange kind of tunnel. My light didn't reach far enough to illuminate the other end. I took a step forward when I realised what direction it went in. The smell. The putrid smell. Edging backwards is when I heard a strange sound behind me. I lost consciousness. Hazy black images toyed with my vision until a steadily growing pain brought me back into reality. I was sitting on the floor of the basement. An intense tingling was running down my right forearm. I turned to look at it. With dizziness still plaguing me, this made me feel slightly nauseated. Vomit spewed from my mouth when I noticed my arm was gone. I was sitting in a pool of my own blood. Wondering how I could still be alive, I then realised my stump wasn't bleeding. The wound had been cauterised. Whatever had done this didn't want me dead. At least not yet. I got to my feet, stumbling multiple times and smacking my head on the wall through lack of blood. The door I tried to go through was ajar, and a face was observing me from the other side. A crazy, deranged face. Turning to my left, I saw what must have been the remains of my arm, accompanied with a smell of cooking meat. It dawned on me that there was some kind of lunatic cannibal living down here. My thoughts were interrupted by a low grunt coming from behind the door. This lowlife clearly didn't want me to leave the building. I was too fast for him. Adrenaline running through my system, I scrambled up the ladder faster than I knew I could. The door in the basement slammed open and I could hear him pursuing me. When I reached the top, the floor began to give way. It was rotted beyond belief. I could hear the strange person attempting its way up the ladder, but it was too late. As I dived out of the window, I could hear the whole floor go, burying the basement in rubble. I ran to the edge of the property to get Phoenix, but he was gone. His leash had been cut through. I had a horrible feeling he'd met a nastier end than me. I made it onto the road before collapsing on the tarmac. My wound had reopened in all the commotion, and I was losing blood faster than I could think. You might wonder if I survived, and let me tell you, I did. More importantly, I moved away from that horrible area. What haunts me to this day is neither Phoenix, nor that cannibal
whatever found